They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but mine was a vintage bottle of aged fury, uncorked with surgical precision. I never imagined I'd be the kind of person to plot a family's downfall with the meticulousness of a military strategist. But then again, I never imagined my own father would throw me out into a Cleveland blizzard on my 18th birthday. Yet here I am, Elara Evans, once the invisible daughter, now the architect of the most spectacular family destruction the city has ever seen. My mother, Amelia, died when I was 16. Cancer took her, a slow, merciless thief. In those final months, she'd traced the lines on my palm with fingers grown thin as paper, whispering promises about how everything would be okay, how Dad would protect me, and how our family restaurant chain, Evans Grill, would always be my anchor. My father, Robert, married Seraphina exactly 11 months after Mom's funeral. The timeline was a cruel, stark number. Seraphina came with her own baggage, Penelope, her 17-year-old daughter who had perfected the art of looking angelic, while being absolutely vicious. Where I was quiet, introspective, and studious, Penelope was loud, demanding, and constantly in the spotlight. Where I helped in the kitchen and asked for nothing, Penelope threw public tantrums until she got everything. The changes started small, subtle erosions of my mother's memory. The framed black and white photo of my parents on their wedding day disappeared from the mantel, replaced by a generic landscape print from a chain store. Then Mom's old garden journals, filled with pressed flowers and her delicate handwriting, vanished from the bookshelf. They were replaced by expensive coffee table books on modern interior design. It wasn't just the big things. It was the little cuts that bled slowly. The scent of Mom's favorite sandalwood candle was replaced by Seraphina's overpowering lavender diffuser. The classical music Mom loved was replaced with modern pop that made the house feel hollow. Each change, each erasure of Amelia's presence, was a small death. But I said nothing. I had promised Mom I would be patient, that I would give Dad time to heal. When Seraphina suggested I get a part-time job to learn responsibility, I didn't protest. I started working at a coffee shop called The Daily Grind, saving every penny. My gut churned with a primal uneasy feeling that I would need it someday. When she convinced Dad to redecorate the guest room where I'd kept Mom's most precious belongings, her sewing machine, a stack of her watercolor paintings, her old music box, I quietly moved everything to the basement. I remember Seraphina smiling that saccharine, razor-thin smile and saying, "Out with the old, in with the new, Elara, it's what your mother would have wanted." Her words felt like a shard of glass in my heart, but the real poison was how she worked on my father. Slowly, methodically, she convinced him that I was ungrateful, that I took advantage of his generosity, that I needed tough love to become a responsible adult. "Robert, darling, don't you think Elara should contribute more to the household?" she'd ask, her voice as sweet as honey, as she arranged a fresh bouquet of hydrangeas that cost more than my weekly earnings. The financial manipulation began gradually. Dad had always managed Mom's trust fund and my college account. Suddenly, there were complications. Seraphina needed to be added to the accounts for tax purposes. The restaurant business required restructuring. I was 18 and naive. I trusted that my father, a man I had loved and respected, had my best interests at heart. I should have paid attention to the avarice that flickered in Seraphina's eyes when she talked about the Evans Grill's prime real estate. I should have questioned why Penelope suddenly had a brand new BMW convertible when Dad claimed money was tight. But I was still that girl who believed in family loyalty, a concept they were about to brutally dismember right in front of me. The night that changed everything was the 15th of December. The first blizzard of the season was howling outside, a furious white gale blanketing Cleveland. I walked into the house after my shift, shaking snow from my coat, only to find Seraphina stuffing my clothes into black garbage bags. She wasn't folding them or packing them neatly. She was cramming them in like actual trash, twisting the neck of the bags with a vicious little tug. "What are you doing?" I asked, a tremor in my voice. Seraphina looked up with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, good, you're home. We need to talk." My father sat in his armchair, staring at his hands, refusing to meet my gaze. The air was thick with a silence that felt heavier than the storm. "Elara," Seraphina's voice took on that sickeningly sweet tone. "Robert and I have been discussing your future. You're 18 now. a legal adult, and it's time for you to learn independence. It's not healthy to rely on your parents for everything." "What do you mean?" I asked, but a cold dread was already coiling in my stomach. I knew what this was. "This house isn't a hotel for freeloaders," she continued, her smile hardening into a brittle line. "Your mother's spoiling is done. It's time for you to experience the real world." I turned to my father, desperate, my heart pounding against my ribs. "Dad, you're really gonna let her throw me out in a snowstorm?" He finally looked up, and what I saw in his eyes broke something inside me. It wasn't love or concern. It was pure, unadulterated inconvenience. I had become a problem to be solved, a loose end to be tied up. "Elara, Seraphina is right," he mumbled, his voice a ghost of its former self. "You need to learn to stand on your own feet. Your mother, she protected you too much." Protected me too much? A hot wave of betrayal surged through me. Mom loved me. There's a difference. Seraphina's mask slipped for just a moment. The veneer of polite concern cracked to reveal the contempt beneath. "Your mother is dead, Elara, and her little princess fantasy died with her. This is Robert's house now, and I won't have a grown woman acting like a spoiled child under my roof." That's when she did it. She reached into one of the garbage bags and pulled out my mother's jewelry box, the small, antique wooden one with a tiny ballerina that used to twirl when you opened the lid. Without breaking eye contact, Seraphina opened it and dumped the contents onto the coffee table. Mom's pearl necklace, her wedding ring, a delicate silver locket, all scattered like worthless trinkets. "These baubles should have been sold years ago," Seraphina said, picking up Mom's wedding ring between her thumb and forefinger. The diamond glinted menacingly under the lamplight. "Robert, we could get good money for this. It's an asset." I lunged forward, but she held the ring high above my reach. "These belong to the estate now. Robert is the executor. Be reasonable, Elara. They're just objects." I was shouting now, my voice raw with grief and rage. "Mom would want me to have them. She promised." "Your mother promised a lot of things she couldn't deliver," Seraphina said smoothly. "But promises don't pay the bills. Now, you have 5 minutes to take what you can carry and get out." I grabbed the small jewelry box from the table, but the ballerina was gone. She had already taken it. I managed to salvage a small silver crucifix necklace that Mom had given me. It was tangled in a scarf Seraphina hadn't been able to cram into a bag yet. The cold reality of my new life hit me when I tried to access my savings account the next day. The account that was supposed to have nearly $50,000, money Mom had started saving for my college, had been cleaned out. Every penny had been transferred to an LLC, Evans Family Management. It was just Seraphina's personal spending fund, a financial weapon used to leave me with nothing but the clothes on my back and the unforgiving winter ahead. That first night, I sat in my mother's old car, a beat-up 2003 Subaru Outback, in the deserted parking lot of a 24-hour diner. Snow piled up on the windshield, muffling the world outside. I had $17 in my wallet, a quarter tank of gas, and a garbage bag full of clothes. The car was the only thing of value I had left, a forgotten relic of my mother's life they hadn't bothered to sell. The next 3 weeks were the longest of my life, a brutal crash course in survival. I learned which gas stations had the cleanest bathrooms for washing up, and which ones would let you use a small sink to wash your face. I learned which fast food places had free Wi-Fi and would let you sit for hours with just a single cup of coffee, nursing the warmth in your hands. I became an expert on which parking lots were safe to sleep in, learning to park near a street lamp where the constant hum of traffic offered a false sense of security. The cold was brutal. It was a physical ache that never left me. I'd run the heater until the gaslight flickered, then sit wrapped in every piece of clothing I owned, shivering until I fell asleep from sheer exhaustion. Some mornings, I woke up with a thin film of frost on the inside of the windows, the bitter cold seeping into my bones. But what hurt more than the cold was the complete erasure of my existence. I kept working at the coffee shop, showing up each day with a smile plastered on my face, a mask I wore for the customers and my coworkers. I was a ghost in my own life. I drove by the house once, a foolish pilgrimage, and saw Penelope and Seraphina loading shopping bags from Saks Fifth Avenue into Penelope's brand new BMW. They were laughing. Through the window, I could see they had already redecorated. Everything that had been mine, everything that had been Mom's, was gone. Later that night, huddled in the freezing car, I saw Penelope's latest Instagram post. She was in Aspen, Colorado, wearing designer ski gear, holding a glass of champagne in a luxury suite. The caption, dripping with irony, read, "Family is everything, so blessed. Family, first blessed." My eyes burned as I stared at the photo on my cracked phone screen. It wasn't just that they were living their best life while I was suffering. They were publicly celebrating my absence. They had erased me so completely that they could post about being a perfect, blessed family. That's when something shifted inside me. The fear and sadness gave way to something new, something hard and cold. This wasn't about me. This was about them. They had built their happiness on my destruction. I wanted to see it crumble. On the 23rd of December, I got sick. A fever burned through my body, followed by uncontrollable chills and exhaustion, so profound I couldn't move. I must have passed out because the next thing I remember is a loud, urgent knocking on my car window. Standing in the snow, looking furious and worried all at once, was my grandfather, Walter. "Elara!" "Jesus Christ!" he roared, his voice cracking with emotion. "What the hell are you doing out here?" He was a retired construction worker in his 70s, tough and no-nonsense. He never liked Seraphina, and he practically carried me to his pickup truck and drove me to his small house in Slavic Village. "How did you find me?" I asked through chattering teeth. "That lying witch told everyone you were traveling," he said, his jaw set. "But I know my granddaughter. I've been looking for you for a week." While I recovered from the flu at Grandpa Walter's house, wrapped in one of his old quilts that smelled of wood smoke and mothballs, he revealed what he'd discovered. Under the guise of delivering Christmas cookies, he'd gone to my old house. Seraphina had been all smiles, her performance as the concerned stepmother flawless. She told him how worried they were about me, how I had taken off without a word. But Dad couldn't even look him in the eye, and Penelope, in a moment of hubris, let something slip about finally having Mom's old room back. Grandpa Walter knew then that Seraphina had turned my mother's old sewing room into a walk-in closet for her lavish designer clothes. "We're going to fix this, Elara," he told me, his voice a low growl. "Your mother didn't raise you to be anyone's victim, and she sure as hell didn't sacrifice everything for you to end up homeless while that gold-digging witch lives off your inheritance." That's when Grandpa Walter revealed Mom's secret. He had received a call from Mom's lawyer a week after her funeral. It was a prearranged message that was only to be delivered if he had reason to believe I was in danger. Mom had suspected something was amiss with Seraphina even before her death, but she didn't have enough evidence to act, so she created a contingency plan. Hidden in her old recipe box, which she'd secretly given to Grandpa Walter for safekeeping, was a small, ornate silver key and a note for me. The note was simple: "For Elara, when she's ready to fight back." The key opened a safety deposit box downtown. The treasure trove it contained was more than just a will. There was Mom's real will, notarized and sealed, leaving me controlling interest in the Evans Grill chain and a substantial trust fund. There was also an old cell phone containing voicemails Mom had secretly recorded. Weak from her illness, her voice was still clear, expressing her growing concerns about Seraphina's influence over Dad and her manipulative financial dealings. Most damning, however, was a meticulously organized folder of financial documents. They were compiled by Lydia Vance, the restaurant's longtime accountant. Lydia had been documenting everything, waiting for me to turn 18 and contact her. "She started stealing before your mother was even buried," Lydia told me when we met at a cafe, her eyes a mix of fury and sadness. "Your mother suspected her from the beginning and asked me to keep a parallel set of books. She knew Seraphina would try to bleed the company dry." The documents were staggering, hundreds of thousands of dollars siphoned from the business accounts into Seraphina's personal spending funds. She hadn't just stolen my college fund. She had been treating the company like her personal ATM while cutting employee benefits and letting the business fall into disrepair. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The old, gentle Elara was gone. In her place was a steely resolve. Lydia's smile was sharp and predatory. "We don't just get the money back. We take them down legally, thoroughly, and very publicly. Your mother left very specific instructions. But first I had to decide if I was ready to become the person who could execute such a plan. The girl who had been thrown out was trusting and naive. The young woman studying the evidence of her family's betrayal was someone different, harder, wiser, and filled with a cold, calculated rage. "I want them to pay," I said quietly, the words feeling foreign yet right. "I want them to lose everything." While the legal process began, a quiet, sinister sabotage campaign started against me. Seraphina was not one to wait for a fair fight. When I applied for a small apartment, the landlord, after initially seeming enthusiastic, suddenly said it was no longer available. When I inquired about a bank teller job, they went with someone else after initially offering me the position. I later learned Seraphina had a friend on the board who was tasked with keeping me on the streets. She was trying to break me before I could ever truly stand up. But I was no longer the girl who crumpled. I was the girl with a plan, a mission, and a team. My confrontation with Seraphina happened at the Evans Grill during the peak lunch rush. Grandpa Walter and I had arrived just as a local news crew was setting up outside to do a story on the restaurant's revitalization. Seraphina, dressed in a sharp blazer and pearls, was holding court with her society friends at a prime table near the window. I could hear her laughter echoing in the room where my mother had taught me to make pie crust. It was a sound that made my blood run cold. She saw me coming and plastered on her fake smile, the one that never reached her eyes. "Clara, what a surprise! Robert and I were just talking about you," she chirped, trying to feign a casual, pleasant reunion. "Ladies, this is Robert's daughter, Elara. She's been traveling to find herself." I stopped at their table and spoke clearly, my voice ringing out across the quiet restaurant. "Hello, Seraphina. I haven't been traveling. I've been living out of my car for 3 weeks because you threw me out into a blizzard." A gasp rippled through the restaurant. The clinking of cutlery stopped. Seraphina's face went white. Her friends' perfectly coiffed heads turned to me, their whispers like buzzing bees. "But I'm back now," I continued, my gaze fixed on hers. "And I'm not here for a visit. I'm here to let you know Cleveland will soon know exactly what kind of person you are. The lawyers will be serving papers soon. You see, it turns out you can't steal a dead woman's legacy as easily as you thought. My mother was smarter than you gave her credit for. She left me everything." A single, perfectly applied drop of sweat rolled down Seraphina's temple. The composure she had cultivated for decades was cracking. How dare you, get out of my restaurant." "It's not yours, not anymore," I said softly, a ghost of a smile touching my lips. "The will I'm talking about is the real one. The one my mother prepared, with the controlling interest in Evans Grill left to me, not to your little scam of a family management company." I walked out, leaving Seraphina sputtering, her friends whispering furiously. The damage was done. Her carefully constructed public image had just suffered its first public wound. As the news crew, who had heard my outburst, now swarmed around Seraphina's table with their microphones, her false reality began its slow, painful unraveling. The legal papers were served the following week, a thick stack of documents detailing fraud, embezzlement, and forgery. Dad called within hours, his voice a mix of panic and anger. "Elara, what do you think you're doing? You're tearing this family apart." His voice was ragged, the desperate tone of a man losing control of his carefully crafted delusion. "I'm not the one who tore it apart, Dad," I said, my voice steady. "I'm cleaning up the mess you and your wife made. You had a chance to choose me, to choose the right thing, and you didn't. You chose Seraphina and her lies." The conversation was a turning point. It wasn't about him anymore. It was about the consequences of his actions. I hung up the phone, feeling nothing. His calls would become more frantic, more frequent, but I never answered again. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of depositions, meetings with lawyers, and late-night talks with Lydia, who was an absolute force of nature. She was more than an accountant. She was Mom's silent partner in this war, her quiet loyalty, a fierce shield. We learned Seraphina had also been draining the employee pension funds, a detail that turned the civil case into a criminal one. Detective Rodriguez, the lead investigator, was a no-nonsense woman who looked at the evidence with quiet fury. "This isn't just about a greedy stepmother," she said. "This is a full-blown criminal enterprise." Penelope, who had been a minor for most of the fraud, was not charged, but her life began to unravel just as publicly as her mother's. The BMW was repossessed. Her expensive private school tuition was cut off, and her designer clothes were sold to pay for mounting legal fees. Her social media, once a curated fantasy of luxury, went dark. The karmic retribution was sweet. I learned from a friend of a friend that she was working at a mall cosmetics counter, her sense of entitlement colliding with the harsh reality of minimum wage. The turning point for the criminal case came from the most unexpected place, a charity gala. The Cleveland Museum of Art was honoring Seraphina as Philanthropist of the Year for her charitable work, which was funded by the money she stole from the restaurant. The irony was suffocating. Lydia and I saw this as our stage. Your mother always said public shame was the only thing Seraphina truly feared, Lydia told me. She's built her entire identity around being Cleveland's perfect society wife. Take that away, and you take away everything. We laid out the final plan with the precision of a military operation. The gala would be the scene of the crime and the resolution. I would make sure everyone who had ever admired Seraphina, who had ever believed her lies, would witness her downfall. I would take the false narrative she had built and burn it to the ground, with her and my father standing in the center of the fire. The night of the gala, I arrived wearing my mother's black evening dress, the one she'd worn to the very same event years ago. It fit me perfectly, a second skin of quiet defiance. I watched from the back of the ballroom as Seraphina took the stage. She was a vision in a custom-made gown, her face a mask of practiced benevolence. She held the microphone, her smile radiating out to a sea of donors and society pages. "Family is everything," she said into the microphone, her voice resonating with false sincerity. "We must protect and nurture our children, guide them through difficult times, and show them what unconditional love looks like." That was my cue. I walked toward the stage as Lydia, from a control booth she'd borrowed for the evening, made her move. The grand screen behind Seraphina, which had been showcasing her charitable deeds, suddenly flickered. The first slide was simple and stark, a photo of me 3 weeks after being thrown out, sitting in my frozen car looking exactly like what I was, a homeless teenager. "Ladies and gentlemen," my voice rang out, amplified by the microphone I had discreetly clipped to my dress. The sound cut through the stunned silence. "I'd like to tell you about family values. I'm Elara Evans, and I am the daughter this woman had thrown out into a blizzard on my 18th birthday." The room erupted in gasps. Seraphina froze on stage, her hand still holding the microphone, her face a mask of shock. Slide after slide of evidence appeared on the screens around us. The forged will, the real will, the spreadsheets showing stolen money from employee pension funds, financial records detailing the hundreds of thousands siphoned from the business and into Seraphina's bank account. Then, the final devastating blow. The screens went dark for a moment, and then a new image appeared, a photo of my mother, Amelia, laughing in the kitchen of the Evans Grill. Then her recorded voice filled the hall. It was weak from her illness, but every word was clear, purposeful. "I'm worried about Robert's judgment regarding Seraphina. I've made provisions to protect Elara if my worst fears come true. My daughter is stronger than she knows, and I pray she'll never have to prove it." The silence that followed was absolute, the kind of silence that feels heavy enough to suffocate a room. Then, the double doors at the back of the hall opened. Detective Rodriguez walked in with 2 uniformed officers. She strode confidently toward the stage, her gaze fixed on Seraphina. "Seraphina Evans and Robert Evans," she announced, her voice firm. "You're under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and forgery." Seraphina, her mask of composure completely shattered, tried to run, but the officers caught her. My father, Robert, just put his head in his hands, his body slumping in his chair as the cold click of handcuffs echoed through the stunned silence. The legal aftermath was swift and brutal. With Lydia's meticulously kept parallel records and my mother's evidence, the prosecution had an airtight case. The fraud was so extensive and so poorly concealed that Seraphina's lawyers couldn't even mount a defense. Seraphina got 5 years for grand larceny and embezzlement. My father, Robert, received 2 years and was ordered to make full restitution, a sum he could only pay by selling off every asset he had, including their Cleveland mansion. Penelope, who had been a minor during most of the fraud, avoided charges, but her future was permanently altered. The gold-plated life she had taken for granted was gone. But the real victory wasn't the prison sentences, it was what I built from the ashes. With Mom's real will, I became the majority shareholder of the restaurant chain. My first act was to rename the flagship restaurant Amelia's Table, a tribute to the woman who had saved me from beyond the grave. With Lydia and Grandpa Walter by my side, I worked with the staff to restore Mom's original recipes and her unique atmosphere. The old, worn photos of my parents went back on the walls. The menu once again featured her signature dishes, things like the Amelia's apple pie, which had disappeared during Seraphina's reign. I established a foundation for homeless youth, specifically for those who had been rejected by their families. I made sure every employee at Amelia's Table had good benefits, fair wages, and a true sense of belonging. Most importantly, I learned I was stronger than I had ever imagined. The frightened, shivering girl thrown into the snow was gone, replaced by someone who understood that family isn't just about blood. It's about loyalty, love, and choosing to show up for each other. Grandpa Walter and Lydia became my new family, my chosen family, the ones who had loved me when my own father had turned away. A year later, I stood in Amelia's Table during the dinner rush, watching families share meals and laughter. The snow was falling outside, big fat flakes that reminded me of that terrible night when my old life ended. But instead of feeling cold and lost, I felt warm and complete. I had learned the hardest lesson. Sometimes the people who are supposed to love you will fail you completely. And sometimes the only family you can count on is the one you build for yourself. And I understood the final, greatest lesson of all. Sometimes the best revenge is living so well that your enemy's betrayal becomes the greatest gift they ever gave you. They thought they were destroying me, but they were only setting me free. And that freedom was worth more than any inheritance they could have ever tried to steal.